there's some good sheriffs out there and people who are starting to stand up and say, we're going to follow the Constitution. We're not going to do this anymore. That's a good standard. I'm seeing that. Not enough, but that's good. But the only hope I think we have in this country is pulling back in our local communities and looking at some of the things that are being proposed, force this, force that, lockdowns and that, and say we're not going to do it.
This is Dunnigan Kaiser, founder of Liberty and Finance. I'm now a licensed gold and silver broker for Miles Franklin. Call me directly for the physical gold and silver that you need at the best price with personalized private service from one of the oldest and best companies in the business. For fastest service, just call 1-888-81-LIBERTY. That's 888-81-LIBERTY. And either I or one of my sons and fellow brokers will call you back as soon as we can and understand your needs. Welcome back to Liberty and Finance. We have a returning guest. John Whitehead is a constitutional attorney who has argued cases up to and including the U.S. Supreme Court. He is the author of numerous articles. He's founder of the Rutherford Institute, which sticks up for the rights of ordinary individuals against government overreach. He's here again on Liberty and Finance this Thursday, August 19, 2021. John, thanks for coming back on.
Hey, thanks for having me on, sir.
And we asked you to come in and talk about a lot of the existing threats to people's rights and liberty that are being trampled in our current era. And you directed me to an article that you had recently released just a week ago. T is for Tyranny, How Freedom Dies from A to Z. I'm hoping you could take us through step by step because it's very thought-provoking. A lot of the themes that are brought out in there are ones you've spoken with us about before. However, you brought them all together here and presented them in a very, very compelling collection that really is a real wake-up call to people to realize that, people argue, oh, there's no slippery slope or whatever, and it's like, well, folks, when you start to see this many examples all portrayed together, it really gives us a good overview of where we're losing this battle of our freedom and maybe what we can do about it. So if you would, first of all, thank you for doing that, and secondly, if you could start us into your article about T is for Tyranny.
Yes, T is for Tyranny, How Freedom Dies from A to Z. It's I go through the alphabet, maybe, if you need to, and give examples of what's happened to us. But just a little quick history here. The slope began to slide at 9/11 when the U.S. Patriot Act was passed, giving the FBI and all these agencies immense power just to do anything they wanted to do and gut the Constitution, tracking you wherever you go, all those things. National security letters where they don't use warrants anymore. They just show up at banks and get all your information. And by law, the banks and them can't tell you that they've been there under these national security letters. Most people don't realize all this, but they're doing it. They're threatening people. And so we started a long time ago. And now with this COVID crisis, things are zooming. It's like you're headed down a slippery slope of ice, and the ice is getting slicker and slicker. That's basically what's happened. In fact, I would tell people this when I'm asked, I have never lived in America like we're living in today. It's like living in a foreign country to me. I don't see, we're supposedly the land of the free and all that, and we're not practicing that right now. It seems that you either fall in line or you can be threatened by some government agent who can come to your door now and ask whether you're vaccinated. And I'm telling people it's time to either stand up for your freedoms or they're going to get flushed, folks. They're going to be gone. And the slippery slope, like you're using that euphemism, is something the deep state, as they call it, which has been proven to exist. The FBI admitted it in the memo. There is a deep state that runs the government. And you're talking to someone, like you said, who's sued in and out of Washington, D.C. for over 40 years. I've seen it, and I've talked to former agents who have worked for the government, and they tell me the same thing, that in Washington, D.C., which is running our country now and dictating everything, it's run by money. And this was proven by a study that came out of the Princeton University and Northwestern University about 5 years ago, where the professors studied all the laws, regulations passed in Washington, D.C. over 20 years in Washington, D.C., and they came to the conclusion that we are ruled by 585 billionaires, which consists of an oligarchic elite. And whatever way the money goes is the way things go in Washington, D.C. And I've been told that by senators, by the way. I've had senators, one senator looked me right in the eye and says, John, if someone in this town says good morning or good afternoon, it's for one reason, money. And I was a younger man with that. It didn't quite sink in at the time, but when I got involved in cases, I started seeing that. So that's basically where we're at right now. And I can go through the primer part and get through as much as I can, but if you really want to read it thoroughly, I would, folks. Go to Rutherford.org and download T is for Tyranny and read it very carefully. I'm going to go through and give you some examples of it, if that's okay. Is
Sure,
okay,
yeah, and folks, we'll put a link to this article, T is for Tyranny, in the description of this video.
So basically what's happened, I would say the letter A in the alphabet, I call A is for the American police state. And what I mean by that, we're in a government right now that does not view us basically as human beings, but mainly as enemy combatants. We live in a suspect society where everything that we're doing is being watched for one reason, either to sell us something or to control us, or we can get arrested. And we're seeing more and more of that happen across the country. And I can use more examples in just a second. But one thing I would say, and the letter B is for the Bill of Rights. I'm shocked when I talk to lawyers or speak to lawyer groups, which I have for years, when I raise the question to them in a speech or something or in a lecture, can any of the lawyers in this room give me the 5 freedoms of the First Amendment? And I can't get an answer most of the time. These are lawyers who practice so-called constitutional law, and I have college students now telling me when they're in law school, the professors are announcing that they're not going to teach the First Amendment, sometimes not the Fourth Amendment and other issues in constitutional law. And I'm going, wait a second. You can't teach the Constitution without the Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights were given to us by people like James Madison and others who, when they saw, and they were, a lot of them were a bit reluctant to do a Bill of Rights. Madison and people like that, because they wanted a government that would be a representative government, and they believed that it might happen. And but they started seeing some problems developing. So they came up with the first 10 amendments to the Constitution, which are Bill of Rights, which guarantee you the right to free speech, the right to protest, in front of government, to tell the government to F off if you want to, fight back, as long as it's peaceful, the right to own a weapon to protect yourself, the right to keep the police out of your home in the Third Amendment. They can't be living in your home and taking over your home, but we're starting to see that. The Fourth Amendment is the police being able to raid your home. Ladies and gentlemen, there are 80,000 SWAT team raids and growing annually in America, where up to 500 dogs a day are killed in America by cops. They're busting through doors. And I've actually had some police chiefs who have read my stuff over the years and have questioned it. And one actually called me and said he was doing away with SWAT teams. And I said, why? He said, you're right. It's gone too far. He said that it's a small town, they did a SWAT team raid, and one of the police put an AK-47 assault rifle to a 4-year-old kid's head. He said it freaked out the whole SWAT team. They were pushing him away and going, what are you doing? What are you doing? But the problem is, in the academies now, the police academies, the police are being trained very militarily. It isn't the old protect and serve. Like I said, when I've told many stories about this, when I was growing up as a young man in the 1960s, some of the police didn't even carry guns in the place where I live, in my town, Illinois. They just didn't want to do it. And they dressed in brown uniforms. Now they're in black outfits with Kelvar helmets. You go into big cities, there are policemen standing on the street corners like I used to see in foreign countries, by the way, when I travel. I never saw it in America. They're standing there with assault rifles. They're going, whoa. So the so-called Bill of Rights, as we've known it, folks, if we don't start teaching our kids, they're not taught in the schools anymore very well. We have a Bill of Rights pamphlet you can get and teach your kids at home, and that does work. But we're going to have to start doing those kind of things. The letter C is for civil asset forfeiture, which is a scheme by which if you're driving, and I tell people don't drive with very much cash in your car, because what is happening routinely across the country is police are pulling people over, asking them if they have any pot in their car, anything illegal, and they're looking. And what they're doing is they're arresting people, pulling them out of the car, saying we thought we smelled pot or saw pot, and they're taking their cash. They're taking people's homes, by the way, the police are, local police. They make a lot of money off of this, and then they split it with the federal government. It's a multi-billion-dollar franchise across the country. Most people don't realize that's happening. But what happens is, and we've been involved in some of these cases, is An old lady, for example, who her money was taken in her home, she couldn't afford to get a lawyer to get it back. And that's happening all across the country. I have D for drones. I've argued about drones. I helped write the first drone ordinance in the United States, and it was passed, actually, by a local city council. Worried about drones, concerned that drones should not be armed and have all sophisticated surveillance, that we should not be being watched wherever we go, violates the Fourth Amendment, believe it or not, unreasonable searches and seizures. Um, but drones now are being used by local police. They have dogs now, which are robot dogs. They give them names, and some of the residents are complaining they don't want the dogs in their neighborhood, robot dogs, coming to their front door, by the way, with a drone connected to a drone up over on top of them. And they've been alerted by facial recognition, which drones can pick up from 2 miles above and track you. And so we're moving into a very strange society. I'll talk more about that in a minute, where we're seeing basically robotics starting to take over. The letter E is for emergency state. We're definitely in an emergency state, which was the first basic emergency state that I saw clearly come out from the shadows. Shadows is a good word when you're dealing with government. And was after 9/11. And all of a sudden you had George W. Bush issuing two executive orders setting up giving the president the ability basically to arrest, round up people, put them in camps or whatever he needed to do in times of so-called distress in the emergency state. We're in that emergency state right now. And it could get worse depending on the variants, whatever is being propounded by the government that we're working with, trying to work with at this particular point in time. And what an emergency state does is that if they get ready to come get you, they can come get you. And it's much like what we've seen in prior regimes and countries, and that leads me to the next letter in the alphabet, F, for fascism. The government that we have today, and I talked about the 585 billionaires earlier, is highly influenced by the corporate giants coming out of Silicon Valley, Facebook, Google, Amazon. These corporate entities, by the way, all made a lot of money in the last year since all this COVID stuff. But they have billion-dollar contracts to maintain the intelligence clouds for all 17 intelligence agencies, the National Security Agency, the FBI, the CIA, and down the line, and they have access to that information. And it's what Benito Mussolini called corporatism. The fascists loved it, being able to work with private businesses, make a lot of money, get funded. And most people don't realize this, but this is a true fact. There was a business meeting in Nazi Germany before Hitler was basically came to power. And after the meeting, the head of the meeting, which was some groups from the United States that were involved, corporations in Germany, came out. The German press asked the spokesman for the meeting, what is your result? And the leader of the group said, we hired Hitler. That's the actual phrase he used. So when we have a president of the United States today, I tell people to do this. And James Madison said it best. We ought to mistrust all those in power. And if you want to be a patriot, I'd say use that as your first principle. Question everything they're doing. Do we really have a president? I've had one former NSA agent that out of the business. He was really upset. This is after the Edward Snowden revealed what was going on a lot with the NSA and stuff like that. He kept using the word Oz, and I said, who in the heck is Oz? And he goes, the president, John. And I went, you call the president Oz? He says, have you seen the movie? And I went, yeah. And I looked at him, and he looked at me, and I went, Oz, the president's Oz. I get it. And he was basically before talk about the deep state came out. He was talking about the deep state. But that's basically what we have. The president of the United States is, listen, when Facebook goes into the White House, Zuckerberg, they have private meetings, they have dinners with the presidents. Listen, Dunnigan, you and I, we can go bang on the door. We're not going to get in. We'll probably get arrested if we go ask to eat dinner with the president. So it's a whole different situation for the people loaded with money is what I'm saying. And we're moving into a corporatism type situation that we have already. The letter G I have is G for grenade launchers, global police. Starting basically in the 1980s, and zooming after 9/11, tons of military equipment started flowing to local police departments. Some cities that have 5,000 residents have grenade launchers. They have MRAPs, which are tanks on tires, assault rifles, sound cannons that can blow people away, all kinds of far out taser devices and stuff like that. And they're armed to the teeth now. They work closely with the FBI. And the FBI, by the way, we've studied the FBI, we've written a lot on that, I have anyway, it is one of the most corrupt institutions we have in government. The FBI controls all the local police. And that's one thing I've actually suggested to city councils and people in local communities. Find out who your local police are working with. If they're working with the FBI, you should move the federal government out of your local police and make it local police, not national police. And the local police today, I would say this, I have people who have contacted me and say, we're ready to take on the government, we're getting our weapons. I tell them, you'll get blown away. They have enough equipment today. They can call in the National Guard in 2 seconds. They have drones. They'll be flying down. They'll blow you away. And by the way, and I'll say this, a lot of government entities love it when people get violent because they can say, okay, now we can go in and take care of them and smash their faces. And that's what we've seen over the time. It's still happening. There was a recent report that just came out over the last several days showing that shootings in rural communities have skyrocketed this last year. They can't figure out why, where people have been shot by police, unarmed people, etc. So there's something going on in the country there that's not really clearly defined. The letter H is for Hollowpoint bullets. And again, Americans don't hear about this if you watch the mainstream news, which I don't trust and do not watch. You don't ever hear about Hollowpoint bullets. The Department of Homeland Security, about 6 years ago, contracted with the ATK Corporation to actually produce for them 1.6 million Hollowpoint bullets. And this has been handed out to the Smithsonian Institution, IRS. All federal agencies now have SWAT teams that they use. They have Hollowpoint bullets. There are about 175,000 federal agents now armed with Hollowpoint bullets. I'm a former military officer. When I was in the military, I was an infantry officer. I taught men how to shoot in war. We weren't allowed to use Hollowpoint bullets because they violate international law in most countries. Why? Because when they on contact, they expand. A lot of people don't understand that. That's what went in JFK's head, by the way. That's why the back of his head flew off. Martin Luther King. And they are very, very powerful. Now, the question I've always had, when I've raised it with government officials, why do we want federal agents running around with Hollowpoint bullets shooting American citizens? They have trouble. There's not much of a response to that. But there is a paranoia there behind all this, and I've seen it happen with the government. And there's the 2030 video, which I've talked about probably on your program before, but the Pentagon produced a video several years ago predicting that by 2030 the country's going to collapse and they're going to have to institute martial law. So there is a paranoia there about American citizens. And when you read the FBI reports, though, that come out about violence in America, it's at an all-time low. Americans are not a violent culture generally. There are sections and areas of violence that we see here and there, but generally we're not violent. So why in the world do they want Hollowpoint bullets, grenade launchers, drones that have weapons, robot dogs? Again, they're paranoid.
We'll put a link, folks, to that that video, the 2030 training video, in the description of this video.
Right. Yeah, it's a good thing to watch because it's really scary. By the way, it's directed by a Hollywood director who remains anonymous. But if I had to suggest who it might be, it looks very Spielberg. The letter I is for Internet of Things. Right now, everything you're doing is being watched. I talked a minute ago about the large corporate entities like Facebook, Google, and Amazon. They maintain the intelligence clouds. Everything's listening to you. Your Alexa speaker, your television sets now. The FBI admits this. They have admitted it. It was a stumbling admission, but an admission. They can turn on your phone from a distance, and it becomes a
Seeing device.
speaker, and they can turn on your laptop and it becomes, they can watch you visually. So they're definitely there. And another thing, most Americans, when I raised it, they have no idea, have never heard of it. Google announced, was it 5 years ago, that their program of Singularity by 2029, and it's amazing how it fits with the video with the Pentagon in 2030. But by 2029, the human mind is going to fuse with computers. And that could very well happen at this point in time. And I see it especially because the younger people in our country are completely enamored with their cell phone devices and are staring at them continually. They'll buy anything the cell phone teaches them. And I'm afraid that that could happen. And of course, Elon Musk, who does SpaceX, now has his Neuralink, which can be placed in your prefrontal lobe, and you can be connected to a computer. That's where we're headed, And I think that again, everything we're doing, people don't realize the FBI has over 50 million DNA samples of American citizens, and they're collecting that as we go along. They want our DNA, and they've got it, of 50 million citizens. And two scientists from Russian scientists actually admitted in a research paper that they can alter DNA. All they need is a picture of it, and they can create it, and it can be placed at crime scenes. And you know something? The judges I've been around buy it as if God spoke to them and said, that's them. DNA is like God. And they believe it. And it's very, very dangerous. Jailing for profit. The United States has the biggest private prison system in the world, where you have women working up to 12 hours a day for companies like Walmart, picking fruit, vegetables, making products for Microsoft. Many of them are in there for minor crimes that people never used to go to prison for. And the question I've got, if this is the land of the free, why do we have the largest prison population in the world otherwise? I mean, we're locking up people today I hear police getting freaked out. I mean, police who have been caught in some areas caught selling cocaine are arresting people for selling marijuana. And you got to look at that twice and go, what's that? And think about it, because they're there to make money, and it makes money for them, putting people in prison. And recently, people in local jails have been complaining how they're being treated, and some of them slammed up against walls. Again, J is for jailing in America. Skipping a few here since our time is running quickly here, I would say L is for license plate readers. Another thing that people don't realize, the police have license plate readers now. They not only track you as you're driving along the road, they go into parking lots now and actually pick up wherever license plate you have on your car, read it, and now they track you wherever you go. They've been actually tracking people going to political rallies and stopping some along the road, questioning them. So when you have local police reading social media, which they do, tracking where you're going with license plate readers, and they have drones that are watching you and facial recognition software, about the only thing you can do these days to escape the government technology system is hide in a cave with nothing electronic. But people aren't going to do that. So we're willingly, in my opinion, we're moving toward those movies like Minority Report. I suggest people see some of these films, Blade Runner, and others that have predicted the future of where we're at now. In fact, I've just published my first novel, The Eric Blair Diaries, The Battlefield of the Dead, and it's about George Orwell, who comes back soon and realizes that everything he predicted came true, and he's trying to help change it. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the mentality we're going to have to develop, or we're going to be lost in a deep hole. The letter M is for main core. Again, this is something most people don't realize it. You have to research it, but the government has a database called Main Core. It has at least 8 million names, and I'm sure more. They admit 8 million names of people, dissidents, that could be rounded up in times of distress. They be placed in FEMA camps. By the way, there are FEMA camps across the country, as I've been told. George Bush gave the Halliburton Corporation $385 million to build FEMA camps across the country. A former NSA agent actually told me that they're on military bases. They've been built, and that people can be rounded up at any time the government decides to, and that will be part of the emergency state. So there have been talks about that, but extremists today, I use the word extremist on this database. Dunnigan Kaiser, having me on this program, you are an extremist. If you get rounded up, give me a call before they come get you, okay? I'll be glad to defend you, all right? But that is an actual database. So what about a government that's watching people, tracking them? The FBI has 80 million names on a database of people they have watched or created files. They tracked Martin Luther King, 17,000 pages of information on Martin Luther King. Ernest Hemingway, the great author, they tracked him. John Lennon, the Beatle, the famous Beatle who wrote Imagine, peace, songs about peace. He was an anti-war activist, so they actually snuck in his house in the bathroom and the apartment he lived in and listened to all of his phone conversations. Frank Sinatra, the great singer, wrote one letter where he said that he agreed with a group that was protesting something. The FBI automatically labeled him a leftist and started watching him. Pete Seeger, you go down the great folk singer, all these people, 80 million names of people. So all you have to do is disagree with the government and you get on these databases. The letter N is for no-knock raids. Again, there are 80,000 SWAT team raids occurring across the country annually. You never hear about it on the news. There are SWAT team programs that glorify these SWAT team raids. 80% of these SWAT team raids, by the way, that we're seeing where they're crashing through doors in the middle of the night, they're killing people, decorated Marines who've done nothing. Or for mere warrant service where a policeman used to show up and knock on the door to show you the warrant. But now they go through at 3 o'clock in the morning and smash through the doors. Jose Guerrero in Arizona shot in his home in Arizona. The police were doing a sweep of his neighborhood looking for pot, and they crashed through his door in the middle of the night. He had 2 children and a wife. He pushed them in the closet behind him and stood at the end of his hallway with the only weapon he has, the hunting rifle. He was shot 70 times. He died. Guess what? No marijuana in his home. That's happening across the country, and you don't hear about it in the so-called mainstream media. P is for pathocracy and pre-crime in the country. There was a recent SMU study. The professors tried to find out exactly where, and they were concerned about the development of psychopaths in the country. And psychopaths do run amok in America. They were trying to figure out where they congregated, mainly in big cities, but their final conclusion was the main congregation of psychopaths was in Washington, D.C. And they usually, they run the government. I mean, every president I've seen has basically a psychopathic personality. That is very charismatic, but about one thing, they want to run the show. I've seen some presidents and talked to former agents who tell me what goes on in the White House, and some of that stuff is shocking because these people think they're little lords and kings. And they don't give a damn about the American people. No, they care about money, control, and they want to run for president again and get elected 2 times. And then some of them go in without a lot of money, but they go out with a lot of money, obviously because of the billionaires who run things. S is for the surveillance state. Like I said, we're in an amazing thing now where everything is being watched. We have a paranoid government. Most people don't realize this either. The Department of Homeland Security does threat assessments on all homes in America now. They're trying to classify homes according to the information they have. The threat assessment scores go from green to red. If you've had a parking ticket, if you've been arrested for something you didn't do and found not guilty, your score bumps up. They go from green to purple to red to orange and whatever, but red's the final bad score. If you own a weapon, you get a red. We've had some cases where the police arrive at the door they're agitated, all agitated. They're talking to a man and a woman. I mean, we had one case in. They said, we want to talk to so-and-so in the home. And the people came out and they said, well, this is a man and a woman, just normal people. They said, who are you talking about? He's not here. And they said, oh, yeah, you're resisting, aren't you? And the guy said, no, not necessarily. And he grabbed the guy, took him out, smashed him head on into the ground outside his home, grabbed the lady, pushed her aside, went in the home, didn't find anything out. We filed a lawsuit and actually won that case. But the point is, the agitation is because they have all this information now. If they come to your door and you have a weapon, they're going to be agitated. And I mean, to buy a weapon today, you have to get approval of the government, essentially. Mm-hmm. And so they know where the weapons are and how they can get them. And that's why, again, I would say some of the SWAT team raids that we've seen or helped with, where they shot people all agitated 70 times, shooting a guy at the end of his hallway for possible marijuana. You got to be kidding me. And old men who come to the door with a cane, they mistaken for a weapon, and they blow them away. It's been happening all across the country, but you don't get much information on that. So we're being watched. Whatever you do, they have a program that the Justice Department of Homeland Security called Operation Vigil Eagle. They watch every returning veteran now. When you come home, if you served in the service, you've done your service, you've served, they track them. We've had cases where they've arrested servicemen for posting stuff on Facebook or whatever and taking them to a jail. I had one case where a former veteran, actually, I asked him a question about some major drills they were doing in a local community. He sent me 2 sentences and said, the mountains simulate what's going on in Afghanistan and other countries, and that's why you're seeing the exercises. The next day, 2 FBI agents arrived. They had guns and armed. They said if he ever communicated to me again or anybody like that again, they were going to deport him from the United States. Scared him to death. He came in my office crying. That's what is happening in America. If you're in the middle of this stuff, like someone like me, you'll see it. And visas for viruses and vaccine passports, bodily integrity is going out the window if we don't start taking some stands. I mean, are we going to submit to forced vaccinations? Are we going to have the military come in and force us to take a vaccination if we don't want it? And we warn people, and you can go to our website at Rutherford.org. We have a letter now where if you need the request from your employer that you don't want to get vaccinated or whatever, we have a letter that will help you argue your case. Mm-hmm. And you can fill that out. And we get a lot of requests for that kind of information.
Just want to plug in there as well. We are interviewing another constitutional attorney, Dr. Edwin Vieira. He speaks for several minutes about the constitutional basis for the right to refuse, and on the Nuremberg Code and other things about the right to, without informed consent. He said they can't possibly be informed. We don't know the long-term effects, so how can you give informed consent? So that can also be a useful resource. We'll include that link in this description of this video as well.
That's good. And it's just like there's no respect for us anymore. And one reason we're not seeing that because, like I said, the people who run the government out of Washington, D.C., do not really view us anymore as they're doing their statistics, as they're watching us as human beings anymore. We're more like data bits. Data bits can be erased or taken to jail and thrown away for whatever reason. And so that's basically what we're seeing in the country today. And I want people to stand up for their bodily integrity if they have a feeling that they don't want to do these things. And again, groups like the Rutherford Institute were there to make sure you have the information you need. It's on our website. And here's the key. Education gives you a basis to resist. Educate, learn how to speak. If the so-called surge teams come to your door, and they're coming to some communities now where they're asking people if they've been vaccinated, they have their little laptops and stuff, we give a really good set of guidelines for resisting that. But you need to start telling government agents to please quietly leave your property. If not, they're trespassing, or you're going to call the police. So there are ways you can deal with that, and we've been helping people do that. Um, like I said, X is for Key Score. It's a spying program that basically watches everything people do. People do not realize that the NSA is downloading up to 2 million of our emails daily. They're listening into our phone calls. People don't realize that the post office uh, actually photographs and sometimes opens 160 million packages and letters a year watching our mailings. And so the NSA is spread around the world. They have, they call it the Five Eyes program in Australia, Great Britain, around the world, where they're watching. They've turned us into a global surveillance state at this point in time, and that's where we're frozen in a total global police state. And that's where we're at today as we look at these things. And one of the key principles I think in this primer that people need to realize, and I want to expand on it, is Z is for zero tolerance. Young people today, coming up, the way they're being developed, some people are referring to them as the zombie generation, all that, and I see that as probably an appropriate metaphor for what we're seeing. We're taking away critical thinking, and that's one of the most key things we've got to start teaching kids is to question everything. James Madison said it best, maybe. We ought to mistrust all those in power. We've got to stop running from words and confront words with debate, peaceful debate, and make kids think. What we're preparing our children for today is to live in a dystopian sci-fi future where they're going to be controlled by all kinds of AI, robots, etc. Elon Musk at a conference several years ago said this: I've been trying to warn people, they will not listen until they see the robots coming at them down the street. The robots are already there, they're made, they're developing, and we're going to be in a very difficult situation with the singularity and all these things with the computers fusing into our heads, and that's going to happen, and most people are going to jump up with glory and receive it. We're facing a very, very difficult time. There's going to be that minority of people, which I see as the outcasts of the future. And we're going to have to survive in this country, any freedom at all, we're going to have to teach our kids to start thinking. We're going to have to get down our local school boards and make them teach the Bill of Rights effectively. Any kid that can't tell you the 5 freedoms of the First Amendment when they graduated from at least grade school or into high school, our system has failed. When I was in high school, civics was taught like that. It's no longer taught like that. And so if there's any hope in this country, it's going to be at the local level. Start exercising your freedoms through the 10th Amendment, which says that local entities, local governments can nullify acts of the federal government. Push some of this stuff out of your community. Do you really want the SWAT team raids? Do you want them watching everything you're doing? Should your local police be reading your social media posts to try to predict when you're going to commit a crime? Are they really, really schooled that properly to do that? Or would they be making all these mistakes about shooting unarmed citizens, expect to go down the line? And I'll say this a lot. There's some good sheriffs out there and people who are starting to stand up and say, we're going to follow the Constitution. We're not going to do this anymore. That's a good standard. I'm seeing that. Not enough, but that's good. But the only hope I think we have in this country is pulling back in our local communities and looking at some of the things that are being proposed, force this, force that, lockdowns and that, and say we're not going to do it. We're going to stay in our homes. We're going to be responsible people. If there's a time to do this or that to protect others from getting sick, we're going to do it, but we're not going to be forced by a totalitarian government to do it, because the more leeway you give a government entity, the more powerful they become. And they fear. One reason you're seeing all that we're seeing today, fearful people, whatever, is they know. As Hermann Goering said at the Nuremberg trial when he was asked, why was Nazism so successful? He was one of Hitler's chief generals. He said it wasn't Nazism, it was fear. Fear works. Fear makes us hide. Fear makes us run. Fear makes us give up our freedoms. But folks, don't give up your freedoms. You don't have to do that, especially if you get into the right kind of groups, have the right kind of strategy. But beware. The FBI, by the way, pays informants to infiltrate groups and disrupt them and try to turn them into violent or idiotic groups. Be careful, organize, be wise, and let's maintain freedom in America.
Well, John, you've given people a lot to think about and a lot of concern, and now some actionable things at the end here. And people who want to read more of your work should go to rutherford.org and find your weekly, is it weekly articles that you pen there?
Commentary and the books, Battlefield America, has a lot of this stuff in it. And then my new novel, I take what I see happening today, and I just project it in the future. It's happening today, what we're seeing. And that's the problem is, we don't seem to see things until they're already on us. And there are people who have predicted that in the past. Most people cannot see the future until it hits them right in the face, and they don't know it. And all of a sudden it's there. What do you do at that point? But I think we can defeat it if we're smart. Get together in groups, on the local level, and start pushing this stuff back.
Folks, I'm also going to include in the description of this video a link to an interview we recently released with Alex Newman, who's editor at the New American. He talks about how we can homeschool our children, teach them to think, teach them about the rights, the civics, the things that they're not going to be getting from the mainstream, and help them get unplugged from just dependence on this virtual world and start forming real thoughts, real ability to argue. And as you pointed out, John, not to run, not to deplatform people, not to, cancel culture, but to instead stand up for and be able to debate, discuss, and examine things critically. We're very grateful, John, as always, for your presence here. Just thank you for joining us here on Liberty and Finance.
Thank you, sir.
This is Dunnigan Kaiser, founder of Liberty and Finance. I'm now a licensed gold and silver broker for Miles Franklin. Call me directly for the physical gold and silver that you need at the best price with personalized private service from one of the oldest and best companies in the business. For fastest service, just call 1-888-81-LIBERTY. That's 888-81-LIBERTY. And either I or one of my sons and fellow brokers will call you back as soon as we can and understand your needs. Welcome back.